And so on and so on.
Well, my next question had to do with the fragile absolute.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the comments that you made in there, and it overlaps with some of the comments you're making now. When you talk about the imperative of duty and the imperative of enjoyment, and how the two overlap, so that the imperative in contemporary society would be the duty to enjoy oneself. Is what you write about.
But here I try to confront the so-called totalitarian functioning of this enjoyment from the so-called late capitalist permissive functioning. In this so-called totalitarian functioning, there the basic message is do your duty, sacrifice yourself. But then the perverse enjoyment is produced by your very subordination to duty. Here, in spite of all theoretical differences, I agree with Gilles Deleuze, who claims that the key to why did fascism seduce masses is in this surplus enjoyment it produced. That's to say how this perverse subordination itself generated some kind of excessive pleasure. So this is one aspect, that duty itself, obeying duty, generates some excessive perverse pleasure. On the incidentally, to avoid a misunderstanding here, perversion has nothing to do, this is the ABC of psychoanalysis, perversion has nothing to do with so-called sexual perversions, which is why I use it as a bad term. How should I put it? Because, how should I put it, being gay, being whatever you want, for me, is simply, this is simply another orientation, but you can be gay in a perverse way. Perversion is defined in a very formal way as positing yourself, experiencing yourself as the instrument of others' enjoyment. You can be a non-pervert gay, and you can be the most standard missionary style, whatever, heterosexual, and be a pervert. So it's not that. But what one they say is that the opposite thing which we have today, I think, is that pleasure itself, having a good time, is more and more experienced as duty. And we have a kind of empirical proof of this, which is that, as psychiatrists repeat again and again, when people do not have fun enough, they feel guilty. This usually the predominant mode of feeling guilty today, it's not you didn't do your duty, whatever. No, it's when you don't enjoy life, which is why I refer to this scene often in my books. For me, the ultimate scene of this desperate call to enjoyment is a little bit old-fashioned example, but you know this old example of father taking the family out, and then, you know, they prepare themselves, they everything goes wrong, the car breaks down, so finally they arrived at the spot where they are supposed to have the picnic, and then father said desperately, now you better have fun, and so on. No, that's the situation, I think. No, so often this happens to me. I'm here referring to quite an ordinary, everyday experience. Isn't it that, for example, okay, to go to the most intimate sphere, when you have an intense sexual encounter, you're usually so afraid, first night with the beloved, whatever, that you will fail, so that after you do it, you are kind of relieved, okay, I did my duty, now I can really have fun with her or whatever. No, this is, I think, the true message of psychoanalysis, more actual than ever today. That this is what generates all the pathologies, most elementary pathologies. For example, when people claim, you analysts, your message is basically very vulgar. It is that we become impotent, cannot enjoy sex because you internalize the repressive figure of the father. No, the fundamental problem of psychoanalysis is exactly the opposite one. When father tells you, why don't you chase girls, enjoy, and you are impotent. I mean, that's the elementary constellation. And because of this, I think, psychoanalysis is far from being outdated and so on. It's only today, in all these libidinal paradoxes of our late consumerist, however we call it, society, that psychoanalysis is arrived at its time, as it were.
Did you have another question? Okay. Then, the third question I had comes from the same book, once again.
Oh my God, yeah.
And it involves when you talk about the television talk shows and the confession. And I think in the book, I don't have it with me right now, but you're talking about the imaginary.
I confess everything, if you will accuse me of something. No, I'm saying, because you said you don't have the book here, I admit, I confess everything, what you will say that I say there.
Okay, but in the book itself, you talk about confession.
I know, yeah.
And then, how might that relate to the spectacle of consumption and exhibitionism and the same type of film that we're producing right now? With when people do, this, and then, we show them where the beads come from.
Yeah, but you know what interests me here? First, what interests me is how, till some 20, 30 years ago, of course, private details were always part of a manipulation when some people has to become a celebrity. But at least this was, as it were, kept behind the scene. No, for example, a great writer, a politician, whatever, always some rumors what he is privately. This was always an object of fascination. But today, these things are becoming directly part of the public image itself. For example, maybe this is my European naivety, but it always fascinates me if you look at the website or if you go Google search, what you get of certain big stars and so on. With quite a few of them, you simply get a choice. You get their official website, you get their tastes, interviews with them, and then you get some hardcore pics where you see them copulating and so on. It's as if public shots of how you may say are somehow part of your image, no? Second thing, and this would be my key message here, is I think that what is emerging here is something new. It is no longer the old exhibitionism, simply. For example, it always did strike me how strange this is. You can get, websites where, for example, for free, sometimes you can even order where people put a web camera back below into their toilet so you can see them, or just the back of them defecating and so on and so on. But what is going on here? I think this has nothing to do with the old traditional gesture which we all love, this proverbial exhibitionist, you open your coat, nothing beneath it. That's not that. I think that a new space is emerging, which is at the same time no longer private. Of course, if people see you defecating, it's not private, no? But at the same time, it's not simply public, because your image does circulate, but you are nonetheless absolutely solipsistically alone. That's for me the image of subjectivity today. You are totally connected, but alone. It's a kind of a, how should I call it, solipsistic collectivization. And but the lesson of this from me is that if we still claim that subjectivity has some value, it's not the intimacy. I think we no longer can play the game, how to retain some dirty private secret on account of which I can escape the public grasp, so the big other doesn't see me there. No, I think more and more I think that the only way to retain subjectivity, private dignity and so on is through reasserting some kind of public political act, that privacy, intimacy is already a public affair. It's already socialized in a perverse way. So, which is why I sometimes mention them in my books. When people ask me, okay, what about intimacy, the right to happiness and so on today? My ideal are situations which you find in Marguerite Duras novels, where you have a happy couple, but how do they become happy? So that they together are engaged in some task, for example, often even looking for the previous partner of one of them. And they don't look into each other's eyes. They just both look to a third task. And then all of a sudden, while you look out there, you grab the hand and you discover, my God, but really you. What I'm opposed to is this damn romantic idea, happiness means love happiness. You exclude the world, it's just you and me. No, just you and me, it's nightmare, it's not happiness. That would be my point. No, that I still think that we should reassert this old socialist idea that the innermost happiness is something to be shared in a way, which is why, now I will tell you something horrible, but not as a conservative, which is why I in a way find the ceremony of marriage attractive, not because it's marriage, legal, UN inscribed into the law, but at its most elementary, it means, here am I dare publicly to proclaim that I love this woman, this man. It's kind of a minimal socialization. That elementary aspect I love. So again, the lesson of all this, of your question, is for me today that the coordinates of private, public are radically changing today.
Okay. And we have time maybe for one more
Okay.
question, and then I think you have to leave. It would have just a general question about the demonstrations taking place globally, and they also take on carnivalesque dimensions, and that you have puppets, exaggerated body parts, and drums, and people are dancing as opposed to being disciplined. And I'm just wondering, how effective do you see these demonstrations against IMF, World Bank, WTO?
No, they are effective in the sense that, as I always emphasize, IMF and WTO are very paradoxical organizations. Why? Because it's there that the true decisions, which really affect us all, are made. And these are organizations basically without any even minimal formal democratic legitimization, which is, I think, even formally impossible. Like, try to imagine democratic legitimization of World Trade Organization. This would have meant a kind of a mega global elections where, I don't know, 3-4 billion of the people would have to vote. It would have been totally non-transparent. But back to your question, okay, when people demonstrate, at this level, I think that at least as a consciousness raising procedure, a little dose of carnival is okay. What worries me is only that, you know, when you protest, it's very easy to fall in love with your protest itself. So that what you really want is to protest, not to take over, to change things, no? And my problem is that isn't it nonetheless, this is for me the fundamental problem with anti-globalization movement. I totally agree with negative agenda, but how strong is their positive agenda? What do they really want? Do they have a viable alternative program how to organize things? No, to avoid a misunderstanding, I don't have it. No, I mean, what I'm only saying is that these are still the forms of protest which want to be just that, a corrective protest. And I think that true revolution happens when carnival starts to take itself seriously, how should I put it, no? For example, even in France, let's take the model, as they would put it in Iraq, the mother of all revolutions, the French Revolution. Let's not forget that before revolutionary terror, Jacobins, Robespierre, there was this period of enlightenment which was basically a carnival. Crazy thinkers making experiment, usually even hired as clowns, you know, like these big names philosophers, Diderot and so on. What were they doing? They were invited by Catherine the Great, by Frederick the Great on courts, and their radical ideas were even taken over by the very rich as a kind of a carnivalesque crazy games. But what began as a joke, then their heads were cut off. No? And this is what interests me. In this way, I don't think we should write off a carnival. It can begin as a carnival, but I would like to pass to the second stage, which first we make joke, then we cut the heads off. No, I would like the second stage.
So I think we're out of time now.
Okay, then.
And so on and so on. And so on and so on. And so on and so on.